How can I have more willpower over my ego?
That's a very good question. Okay, just a second. Okay, this is really interesting. So, okay, as you know, most people think that they are their egos. They can't even tell what their ego is, right?
Mhm.
They don't even separate it from their experience of life. They're so identified with their egos, there's no way to see it as separate, and especially as something like their enemy. Uh, because if you want to have more willpower than your ego, the only reason you're doing that is because you've basically started to declare war for yourself.
I see.
Yeah, you're like, my ego is hurting me. I'm declaring war because unbeknownst to me, my ego's been at war with me ever since it became parasitical on me,
Mhm.
but you didn't know. Because
Right.
yeah, most times your egos, formed when, man, egos can be formed. They can be formed like, this is not like a psychological point of view. It's my personal spiritual point of view. It's like egos can start to be formed when you are in utero.
Mhm. Yeah.
So like it's like in your like genetics pretty much. Like you just don't like, or epigenetics. I don't really know. It's like when the expression of yourself is sadness because you were born of the womb of a woman who was depressed and put all her sadness in you, her baby, and you were born thinking, I'm born to serve my mother, I'm my mother's energy slave. So
Mhm.
like you don't even know what it's like to be a person without this feeling of you're born to be an energy slave. So what I'm saying is sometimes it's really hard to tell who you are without your ego, if your ego is formed as your like organs are being formed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you have more willpower than your ego? So this is really interesting because already you're saying that you are separating your sense of self from that, whatever
Mhm.
that is, right? And you are conscientiously starting to declare war on your ego. And this might sound sort of like, let's say in quotation marks, low vibe to certain people. Oh, war, I'm a peaceful person, I'm nonviolent. No, you got to
Mhm.
fuck that because it has to do with boundaries, and it has to do with like what I consider your true self. And some people may not go along with that kind of language. But in any way, so number one, you've separated yourself from your ego, which is great. Most people can't even do that because they just think they are their ego. Like even if you point out to someone, man, you just think you're the energy slave of your mother and you feel as if it's your job to take on all of her depression for her. And they're like, yeah, so, and they're okay with it. So they have not separated themselves from their ego. They're like, well, I love my mom. So, people like that, right? So,
Mhm.
so I feel sorry for her, this kind of stuff. Here's the thing. You don't just be stronger than your opponent. And you'll see this in movies. You actually need to believe in the fight or the cause. You have to believe in what you're fighting for.
Mhm.
So in many cases, it's actually like the feminine. So let's just clear the thing. You are in Viking age. Okay, Viking age movie set in Scotland.
Uh-huh.
So you're fighting with that level stuff. The Vikings are coming and they're going to invade your farmland and your territory. You're going to fucking fight for that, right? Because you know your territory, you know your farmland, and you believe in it, and it's Scottish. It's not Viking, it's Scottish. So those people are clearly other. What if you didn't know? Or what if you didn't care? Would you fight hard? Would you have more willpower than the Vikings? No. Yes. So that's why this interesting question, how can I have more willpower than my ego? Well, what do you believe in? What do you believe in that makes you fight to go against your ego, right? And the answer is your inner child. So many times you fight for the feminine. Many times the feminine creates the value. And so if you have low value feminine, there's nothing to fight for. So let's say you there are lands that the Vikings are invading, but you can't grow crops on them. And like the king has fled, the queen has fled, the land is abandoned. Uh, like your family that has owned the land was cursed by everyone and has a bad reputation in the area. If the Vikings come, you're like, fucking take it, just give me a gold coin, you know. You
Yeah.
don't value the feminine in that case. But something that creates a really interesting story is there's a very valuable princess and you're in love with her and she's beautiful and she has all the gowns and all the gold and jewelry, and man, you can't wait to get married to her, right? And if you lose this battle, the Vikings are going to take her. Like, oh my god, you fight so hard, right? That will give you willpower. That gives you willpower. So your willpower is almost tantamount to how much you love the feminine.
I see. Okay. Interesting.
Yes. So in your case, the feminine is your inner child.
I see.
Yeah. And pre this level of consciousness, if you're just one with your ego, you don't care about your inner child because you're willing to rape your own inner child to serve the other. And in the case of someone who, since in utero, they're like, oh, I'm the energy slave of my mom and I feel sorry for my mom, they think their inner child is worthy of being energy raped by their mom. They agree to it. And the exchange is temporal, or it's temporary, and it's surface level, which is my mom approves of me. And the equivalent in what I'm talking about is, well, the Vikings gave me a coin and they're not going to kill me, but they're going to kill the other Scottish people here. So it's like a very surface level, like transactional exchange for giving up the feminine and deciding to not protect her.
Okay. Interesting. How do I get more in touch with my inner child? Is that something that I necessarily need to do in order to defend it, or?
That's a really good question.
Okay.
Okay, just a second. Okay, so this is my way of answering your question today.
Okay.
Getting in touch with your inner child often has to do with boundaries, actually.
Okay.
So, and boundaries has to do with pleasure. And it has to do with non-egotistical pleasure. So what do I mean by that? Does a donkey have an ego? I'm going to say no. A donkey doesn't have an ego. Animals don't have egos. So can you bribe a donkey with gold to give up its home? No. Can you promise donkey, well, you'll become a duke in this new kingdom if you like betray your king? No, you can't. But what kind of pleasure does a donkey have? Tons of pleasure, right? Emotional connectedness, right? Enjoying like sensual pleasures of being a sentient being on earth, So when you get in touch with your non-egotistical pleasure, so not, well, I want my mom's approval, okay? Like not that stuff, but the stuff like a nonverbal child would understand, or seriously, like a donkey would agree with you. This is a pleasure. And it's not just like stuffing your face with like Magnum ice cream bars, because even a donkey wouldn't like that. Like, like I think animals are in general, I would say a lot of animals are good at not abusing themselves.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So Yeah, so not overdoing it necessarily on specific kinds of pleasures either. So so your boundaries have to do with that. And usually people get really confused about what their boundaries are and they go, well, it pleases my mom, so that's within my boundaries. Or it's a part of my religion, so that's within my boundaries. They get really, really confused. Like a donkey doesn't have, right? Would the donkey agree that your religion says XYZ? Like it doesn't understand that, you know? Yeah.
No.
So it's a non-egotistical pleasure that you genuinely feel that often goes against your ego, by the way, you can imagine. So what's pleasurable for you often goes against what's pleasurable for your ego.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's a big one. Um, and and those are your boundaries, very simply put. I mean, obviously it's a much deeper topic.
Yeah. It's harder to do. Well, that's interesting you mentioned like eating the Magnum ice cream bars because I'm at that place where I'm like, oh, well, like if I, eat a whole box of muffins, then I'm, I don't know, not being egotistical because, you know, or like, oh, you know, treating my inner child to this box of muffins. So it must be good for me to eat this entire, you know, bag of cookies or whatever,
You know
Uh,
what's really interesting about the donkey thing is the donkey would never overeat Magnum ice cream bars to avoid feeling a feeling.
right. Yeah. He would.
Nor would the donkey have a concept of rewarding himself for any reason. I did a good job doing that, so I deserve this. That's egotistical.
Interesting. Okay.
So saying I don't care if I eat so much food that I'm going to gain weight, and therefore I don't have an ego. That's ego. I
I see.
really think it needs to go back to the donkey thing. Like I'm serious. Like
Okay. Sorry. Oh, there it goes.
I'm going to end this here, but we can do
Mhm.
this again.
Gotcha.
All right. Okay.
Sweet.
Bye.
Bye.